We haven't seen the shift in the polls that I think Rishi Sunak supporters have been hoping for. That lead that Liz Truss has held for weeks, while we're only seeing a sort of scattergun approach in terms of the polling, and it is very hard to survey Tory members, she is still maintaining that lead, and Rishi Sunak supporters are getting nervous. When I was speaking to them earlier this week, they were saying, we're hearing from Liz Truss's team, come on board, join our team, you want to pick a winner. So the gap is opening up. I think the other problem Rishi Sunak's got is that there are concerns that he's finding it very hard to shake. Concerns about his timing in terms of the resignation being too cynically motivated. He was challenged on that in some of the debates earlier. And I think that is something that no matter what he says, he can't change people's minds about it, no matter how far the contest gets.
Let's bring Bob in on that point, because, Bob, you are still very much in the Rishi camp. Let me just add one thing to that list of concerns that you and your man may have, and that is Rishi being seen to shoot himself in the foot over boasting down there in Kent about shifting aid from deprived urban areas to help in the leafy Tory suburbs. Even people like Jake Berry are furious about that.
OK, well, let's deal with that one head on, Alistair, if you like. Good to see you again, by the way. What actually Rishi was saying there, when you unpick that, is something which I was concerned about when I was local government minister, something I raised with him when he was local government minister, was actually the way distribution of aid works, is that we don't pick up the fact that there are serious pockets of poverty in otherwise supposedly wealthy regions. You'll know, Alistair, the level of rural poverty there are in many parts of this country. You know the amount of poverty that there is actually in coastal towns. That was what we were talking about in the context of Kent and Sussex. And simply a broad brush which says everything down south is prosperous, everything up north needs help, isn't the way that it works. I think he was making a very fair point, that actually you've got to be much more nuanced about that. And in some cases, it's right to say that money has to go into those deprived areas in those rundown rural communities, very poor connectivity, very poor employment, housing opportunities, or those older seaside resorts where there's some really tough social problems. I've seen them myself.
Bob, while you were saying that, for those who are kind enough to be listening to our conversation on radio rather than television, we were also running some pictures both of Rishi and of Liz coming in for one of the televised debates. In your view, how has your man done in those debates? Because the commentary, totally independent, as you'd expect from the likes of me, say that he went from being really aggressive to being slightly more ameliorating, back to aggressive again in Eastbourne. How's he done?
I think he's done really well, Alistair. And actually, thank God it is 4 weeks and not 4 months. But sometimes when you've got a run of these debates, it's a sign of a good debater to be able to change gear and change tone from time to time, depending on the audience and depending on the topic. But what's come across to my mind consistently is that he's the one that's on top of the brief. He's got the figures. He's got the details. There isn't any flam around what he's saying, and he's being direct with people. And I think that's really coming across to folks. I do think that people are thinking. He was in my constituency, actually, Alistair, yesterday morning before those debates. 130 people there, really geared up. And the number of folk who were coming over to me who were saying, well, look, before I was undecided, but I'm going to back him now. And some saying, look, I was going to go to vote for Liz, but no. He's got the responsible, the sensible, the properly conservative solutions to this massive economic problem that's coming towards us.
Bob, the next voice you'll hear will be Aubrey Allegretti, my guest here in the studio with me from The Guardian. Aubrey.
Hi, Bob. I'm just wondering to what extent you think that Team Rishi was complacent at the start and relied on Liz Truss to falter, go into those TV debates, mess up, and for Rishi Sunak to just sort of appear, as you say, on top of his brief. Instead, we haven't sort of seen that performance from her. She seems to have hit the ground sort of running, continued her stride. Do you think that there's been a complacency by Rishi Sunak's team?
I think we just had to change gear from what was a parliamentary phase of the campaign, Aubrey, to the general public campaign. What I think is significant, of course, is that when we ended that parliamentary phase, Rishi had by far the largest number of MPs backing him. And that says something because, you know, the people who've worked with these people, and we've worked with all of the candidates, are perhaps as well placed as anyone to know which one is actually going to win the election for us. Because all the policy debates are fascinating, but they're academic, unless one of them is actually going to take the country with them. Who's the one that's plausible and actually comes across sensibly, calmly, competently to the electorate? Because I think that's what they work. So there will will be changes of gear, as we were saying before, Aubrey, and changes of tone in the campaign. But I think we're revving up well now, and the support that we're getting and the feedback that we're all picking up is really, really strong.
Yeah. Let me bring in another thing that we haven't touched upon yet, but I know all three of us have been thinking a great deal about, and that's the report from the Bank of England in the last 48 hours. And I jokingly said in my introduction, given what the governor of the Bank of England said, who'd really want to win this contest anyway? But the thing that strikes me, Bob, most about that is that whilst contests always yield glitches, the differences on the Bank of England and interest rate seems to be about grasp and competence and Tory vision. And the fact that Rishi is a former Chancellor, knows how the bank works, knows the mandate about inflation intimately, is not winning that argument, whereas the outsider, a former junior minister in the Treasury, Liz Truss, is.
Well, that's something I think that my friends in the Conservative Party need to get a long think about, frankly, because now's not the time for experimentation. Now's not the time for taking risks. I thought it was a very good piece on one of the other rival channels this morning about the risk of us doing a repeat of the Barber boom, which you and I can remember, Alex, of the 70s, when Tony Barber, just like Liz is suggesting now, said, let's put more demand into the economy, let's reduce taxes, not funded out of savings. It'll boost growth. It's exactly what Liz is saying. It ended up disastrously. And we had major inflation, gave us a Labour government, and then all the problems that Margaret had to sort out thereafter. Contrast, Nigel Lawson, Margaret's longest-serving Chancellor, arguably some of us will think the best Chancellor this country's had, perhaps in the last half of the 20th century, coming out for Rishi saying, this is sound Conservative economics. We all want to reduce tax. I want to reduce tax as much as anyone, but you can only do it if you've got inflation under control, if you've got sound money. And it's just reminding my fellow Conservatives that actually we're a sound money party above everything. Because if you don't have sound money, that corrodes inflation. Inflation corrodes, it corrodes savings, it corrodes pensions. It actually divides society as well. And I make no apology for us being upfront with our members and the electorate with that. I think the electorate get it. And I think we have to say to our colleagues in the party, great, let's have vision for the future. But the vision's got to be based upon a firm, sound basis to start with.
And to be crystal clear, this is from Bob Neal's point of view, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that you're speaking on behalf of Rishi. You may be, for all I know, but that's a different way of putting the question. To be crystal clear, you not only think that Liz has got this fundamentally wrong on what she would do with that emergency budget within days of taking over, you think it runs the same risk that Tony Barber risked on behalf of Ted Heath back in the 70s of rampant inflation, collapse, and then, lo and behold, hey, they lost the next election.
I think it runs exactly that risk, Alistair, and having lived through it as a young councillor and activist in those days, I've seen what it does. So that's why I think it's really important. That's why, say, Nigel Lawson says what he says, why Michael Howard has taken the same view, why Peter Lilly, again, one of Margaret's strongest associates, takes the same view, why William Hague takes the same view. All the people who've lived through it and seen it as practical politicians know that this isn't a fanciful risk, this is a real one.
I find that absolutely extraordinary because he and I are of a similar generation. You're obviously from a younger, newer generation. And he's right. Historically, that's exactly what happened with Heath and Barber. And he's right, historically, that's exactly what happened with Thatcher, Geoffrey Howe, and then Nigel Lawson. Liz is turning that history on its head and still winning.
Yes, because she's not just trying to win people's minds, but their hearts as well. And so many Conservative members and some MPs as well feel that they have been kind of starved under Boris.
But is it also, sorry to interrupt, but is it also, as I think Bob is implying, that such is the desperation out there amongst ordinary folk wrestling with the cost of living crisis that they are prepared to take a huge risk? They don't remember Tony Barber and rampant inflation. They just want immediate cuts in tax. They want an immediate reversal of the national insurance tax hike because they are desperate.
Yeah, quite possibly. And levelling up the sort of landmark pledge that was meant to help these very deprived, left-behind communities is such an elongated process that people are looking at 2019. They see that COVID got in the middle of it, but they say, those kind of big system changes we were promised haven't happened fast enough for us. And tax cuts is one of those very insatiable ways of saying to people, you will get that money back in your pocket, so to speak, very, very quickly. That's why it's so...
Even if that money is worth 15% less in a year's time.
Exactly.
Bob, we've got a couple of minutes left. I want to put something to you, and then I'll take a final take from Aubrey here in the studio. And this is what is very much at the forefront of my mind, and that is that your man has two key problems. Aubrey's mentioned one of them, so I'll come to that second. The first one is that if he's got all the brilliant ideas now as a Prime Minister in waiting, why didn't he do it when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer and actually had the keys to the red box and the key to number 11? And the second is Aubrey's point about the party in the country, whether it's Bromley, Chislehurst or Eastbourne last night, will never forgive him for being the man who wielded the knife that toppled Johnson. 2 points there. Why didn't he do it when he was in office, and will he ever be forgiven for knifing Johnson?
Well, if you look, when we started off in office prior to the COVID dislocation, which threw everything out of the window, we were already making steps. We'd taken steps to reduce the levels of tax. In particular, Rishi had introduced the super deduction, as it's called, on corporation tax, which the IMF and the CBI have said was actually world-changing, one of the best things to keep investment in the country. So we were already on track to start that. But of course, the COVID costs, which had to be picked up at the time, nobody argued with that. But what we're saying is you need to start paying that down now. That obviously delayed things, but he has a track record on reform there. Second point, I'll be blunt, I think there's a bit of mythology building up around the stab in the back as far as Boris is concerned. One of my colleagues, Andrew Morrison, did a piece in The Guardian. And Andrew is a regular naval officer. I've known him for years, served Queen and country, was a lifelong Brexiteer, so no side there. Andrew was saying he was so concerned about the situation with Boris that he went to see Rishi and was urging him to try and make a move. And Rishi refused to do so. Because I do not believe this idea that Rishi was a conspiracy theorist. I more than once dropped hints to Rishi when I worked him, not a peep. He never took the bite. So I'm afraid that suggestion, at the same time, as I'll be blunt, I was getting plenty of invitations, others words, for fizz with Liz at exactly that time. Rishi was actually standing by the Prime Minister. I can't speak for others, but I think it's just been convenient to say because Rishi and Sajid Javid, who actually, of course, resigned first, were the two most high-profile people to go first. Let's shift the blame onto them. I don't think that does a great service to anybody, actually. But, let's just take it on the chin and set the facts out as we know they are.
Bob, great to talk to you, as always. Thank you very much indeed. Final brief thought to you. The key point that he's making there is that you rewrite history to suit your circumstances, and this is a fight to the death.
Well, absolutely. And I think the piece that he mentioned, Andrew Morrison, came to me and said, I'm really concerned about the way that this is being portrayed, and I want to show that I was being approached from other people, and actually Rishi was one of the people that was behaving most properly. Now, I think part of the problem the Rishi Sunak team have had, they were too naive in terms of thinking that they could play all this quite cuddly, softly, not engage in too much briefing against other camps. Liz Truss's team were incredibly brutal in those earlier stages during the parliamentary contest, and that's continued and ramped up against Rishi Sunak. And when you speak to Team Rishi supporters, you sort of ask them if they're going to realise, and they say, we think we're getting there, we think we're understanding what they've done.
And you're still absolutely convinced that initial brutality and continuing grasp will yield the big prize for Miss Truss?
Yeah, I believe so, because they've been able to steal a march, be able to rewrite history, as you put it.